Good morning, everyone. I'll get the boring admin out of the way before our great speakers will take over from me. Hi, I'm Corinne Kemp and I'm Marketing Communications Officer for Scottish Procurement Alliance, and I'll be facilitating the meeting. So if during the meeting you think of any questions you want to ask, just put them through the Q&A and I'll shoot them to the team at the end. And also you'll be able to raise your hand and ask it if you would rather say it over the airwaves. But if you're feeling shy, just use Q&A. And that's everything from me. I'll hand over to Clive now.
Thanks, Corinne. Morning and welcome everybody to this morning's webinar, Building a Safer Scotland Post-Grenfell. My name is Clive Feeney. As Corinne said, I'm the Director of SPA, and it's great to see so many of you here this morning. If the fact it is virtual, which is sad, but hopefully in the future. For those of you new to SPA, we're an alliance of public sector bodies throughout Scotland, representing over 100 organisations across housing, from local authorities to housing associations and cooperatives, through to education and blue light services. We set up technical frameworks, specialising in building and construction, and are part of the wider LHC group. As well as supporting our public sector partners, we also work closely with industry specialists, and are delighted to be delivering this webinar in conjunction with the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, Construction Innovation Centre Scotland, and the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations today. This morning, you will hear from Duncan Brock, CIPS Group Director, on the impact of the Grenfell tragedy, the subsequent inquiry, and the Raising the Bar and Setting the Bar reports. We will then hear from Sam Hart, Construction Centre Scotland Innovation Manager, and how we can take the lessons learned from the Setting the Bar report and through innovation, collaboration and partnership working, build a safer future for Scotland. There'll be opportunities, Corinne said, to pose questions to both the speakers at the end of the presentations. And that's everything from me. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Duncan.
Hi, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. I need to share my screen, so if Corinne, you can stop sharing yours, I can then use my slides. Thank you. So what I am going to do this morning is walk you through, I suppose, the summary of the output from all the work that's gone on the Grenfell competence work, start to share some of the insights that we've got from it, and with a particular focus on procurement. As Clive said, I am Director of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. I've been in procurement all my working life, which is quite unusual. I mean, lots of people get into procurement in different ways, but I'm probably one who chose it at an early stage in my career, and I've stayed there ever since, and I'm now working for my institute. And if I reflect over my career, I've never really come across construction. I've worked in lots of different sectors, driven forward a lot of change programs, but never really got involved in the construction sector. And I think it's only as I started to do the work looking at the competence requirements of procurement in the sector, did I start to realise probably why I've never come across it before, that there's a lot to do. There's a lot of improvements needed. And that's what I'd like to spend some time this morning taking you through, sharing some insights. And as Clive said, and as Corinne said, very happy to pick up any questions at the end or as we get into an open Q&A session as we go through. But let me just start by sort of touching on the piece in terms of, so why are we here? And one of the reasons why we're here and talking about it is this Grenfell Tower disaster. It is the, over 3 years ago now, when these 72 people lost their lives in a fire that should never have happened. There was a small fire that broke out on the 4th floor of a flat in the back of an electrical appliance, consumed this building and killed all these people and devastated the lives of the people, their families, and also a lot of the people that surround the building itself. And I think we need to just keep in mind that that's the case. And I think whenever you see stuff that's coming out from the inquiry that is still ongoing, and I know we had a pause on the inquiry as they couldn't take evidence for a while, but the stories that are still coming out about the practices that led up to the tower being in the state it's in are quite shocking. But also I think it's important that we continue to reflect on the fact that this should never happen, and what can we do to make sure that it never happens again on future buildings as we go forward. So I think it's really important that we actually do focus on that, and we focus on the elements associated with that. One of the foundations for the work that we've been doing is the report that Dame Judith Hackett put together back into, what was it, May 2018 now, and that was the foundation, if you like, of a lot of the work that we've been doing around competence, because a key part of her report was that she was really questioning and challenging the competence of people who had been involved in every aspect of the construction of the Grenfell Tower itself. And one of the quotes from Dame Judith, and I've used this a few times whenever I've heard her speak at conferences and heard her talk about the challenge, is that she has said all the way through that in the construction sector, there is a real need. The people know what to do. They know some of the things that need to change. So why wait for regulation? Why wait for government to act when actually some of the changes that we need to make are very clear and understandable for everybody involved? I think it's really important that we keep that in mind, that actually there are things we can do now and things that we should be doing now about changing the focus on elements as we go through. And I think, you know, Dame Judith is still very active. There's an industry safety steering, I think it's a group now rather than a committee that she's chairing. She's still having feedback and listening to progress of how things are going. And I also know she continues to challenge the professional bodies. She's challenging other industry bodies associated with the sector to continue to make the improvements. As an example, I just saw a couple of letters that came from her to the Engineering Council and the UCAS, the UK Accreditation Service, who had given evidence to the Safety Committee or Industry Safety Steering Group a few weeks ago now. And in those, she's still, you know, complimenting people who've done some good work, but also still highlighting where more needs to be done and the pace of change that needs to happen across the piece. And that's something that certainly has stuck with me as I've continued to do the work that I've been doing in this area. I think the other piece that's quite fundamental is the draft building safety bill that was published in July. It took a while. I think the coronavirus pandemic and everything associated with that has caused us a lot of challenges, as did all the preparations for Brexit about 4 times, and all of those have delayed maybe some of the way the government has put things together. But they do have a draft safety bill. They do have something that was coming through Parliament that will reflect some of the fundamental changes that are needed to be able to implement the recommendations that are coming through from industry and from government itself. And I think what's really important, and everything that everyone I've spoken to about this, is that there are some fundamental improvements that need to be made to regulation, and that this bill is the foundation of that, that will lay some of the foundations for people to build on, particularly looking at the key principal roles of the principal designer, contractor, building safety manager, making sure those roles have clear accountability and regulation and support around them. I think that is essential. And again, going back to Dame Judith Hackett, one of the things that she said when this bill was published, and I was on a forum with her at the time, was that she was delighted that actually the government had acted. That if you go back through other tragedies and other disasters that have happened in this space, the government has talked about doing something, but then they've gone on and done some and haven't really followed it through. Whereas now, to the credit of MHCLG and others, they are actually implementing and looking to drive forward the fundamental changes that are needed from a regulatory perspective. But that's regulation. I think that isn't going to cover everything, but it is a good foundation that will be in place as we go through. What I've been involved in is part of the Competence Steering Group. So the Industry Safety Steering Committee or Group set up a Competence Steering Group. It's been chaired by Graham Watts, who's the Chief Exec of the Construction Industry Council. And we have been working away to put together some recommendations for improvement We had an interim report that was published over a year ago now, in terms of the recommendations that came through. That went out for consultation. We got feedback on it. And then the final report was actually published just over a month ago now, really called Setting the Bar, setting this new competence regime for building a safer future. It's been challenging. I mean, it's been challenging to work in an environment where you're trying to put together a report. And I think, Graham Watts has said, and I think in his forward to the report, he talks about the fact that you should never write a report by committee. And I think that's probably a good recognition of the fact that if you don't have a mandate and trying to get people to agree, sometimes that takes a lot longer. But I do believe we've got a really good, strong report off the back of that I think is really important for us as we go through. So what is this Competence Steering Group? So it was set up, I said, under the chair of Graham Watts. There were 13 working groups. Initially, there were only about 6 established. But as these working groups got established on the certain professions, it became very clear that they needed to widen the scope and to cover more professions. And I think when you look at the list of the professions there, in terms of the engineers, the fire engineers, the building control inspectors, site supervisors and procurement, it does cover a lot of the aspects associated with competence in construction. And for the people that I've been involved in, and I had the honour of chairing Working Group 11 on procurement, it's one of the first times that people in the construction sector and in the fire sector had actually come together. And we're talking about common challenges and common goals, if you like, that they wanted to work on together. So those 12 working groups were established, and then the 13th one was set up, which was then called Working Group 0 rather than 13. But that was the one that has really positioned a lot of the recommendations that are now in the final report of this overarching system for overseeing competence. That while we can all look at our own professions, we can look at our own challenges and the improvements we want to make, it does need an overarching system for assessing and evaluating competence. And that's a really important element in there that was then added and chaired by BSI in terms of trying to look at how we pull all this together. So when you look at the report itself, Graham Watts has, a couple of quotes that I've lifted from the forward that he did for it. But I think one element here is that what we've been focusing on is these higher risk buildings. I think initially it was called higher risk residential buildings, but we're now, I think the phrase is being used is higher risk buildings. But these are buildings where people are sleeping, where they're living, where they're actually at risk of things like fire and safety and quality issues associated. But everything that we have looked at, and again, I'll come back to Dame Judith Hackett, she constantly bangs the drum that says, okay, focus on the higher risk buildings, focus on the things that you can do there, but recognize that this needs to be spread out across all of the sector because there's a lot to do to take that forward. I think the other thing here is that we have recognized that there are practices that need to change. We've recognized that we need to improve them, and that residents in some of these buildings have lost faith in whether or not they're actually living in a safe environment. And the fact that there's people still living in buildings which still have cladding on the outside, which still hasn't been removed or replaced, is a real crime. And we need to just continue to look at ways in which we can help people to feel safe in their homes or safe in the buildings that they're occupying. So I think it's really important that we keep that lens in mind. When you look at the overarching system of competence that's put in place, there's 4 real key elements that have been put forward in this latest report. And the first one, and I think it is the critical one, is having a proper formed competence committee that oversees the competence of going forward, sitting within this new building safety regulator. The Competence Steering Group has done a great job in trying to pull things together and have a common goal, if you like, and a purpose. But however, there is no mandate, there is no drive there that says, and you must do these things. It's still very much done as a recommendation of the things that we would like to do. So having a proper committee set up, having a proper structure with it, and having that committee then established that then continues to focus on competence improvement is really important. These suite of competence standards are essential. All of the working groups, including the procurement one that I chaired, have looked at existing competence standards, qualifications, accreditation processes, and have come up with sector-specific frameworks. And it's really important that those things are put in place and that we then drive competence up to the standards they need to be. One of the challenges across the sector, and continues to be, is that, can you mark your own homework? If I say, well, I think you're good at doing procurement, is that good enough? Or should there be a level of independent assessment and reassessment against those standards? And that is a key element of the competence framework here, that there has to be a level of independence assessment, so that, again, we have confidence that when people say, I am at this right level of competence, that it's you know that that's been accredited and assessed in the right way, and therefore making sure that we've then got the right people, certifying people, and they have the right appropriate levels of oversight. So a fundamental shift in setting up this level of competence and a focus, and making sure that we really do things in the right way as we go forward. Now, there's 59 recommendations within the report, and I'm not going to go through all 59 because that would take up far more of your time than you probably wanted to spare this morning. However, I think it's quite important that we focus on the common ones, and then I'll drop into the specifics around procurement. I've already touched on some of these already about the competencies and the focus, and particularly recognising that recommendation 3 is for these regulated roles, the principal designer, principal contractor, and building safety manager. But some of the others that I just want to highlight, having a centralised list or register of the people who are competent, so that anyone who is involved in construction or maintenance of buildings knows that they can go somewhere and work out whether or not people have the right level of competence. There is a need to have mandated continuing professional development, and linked in with that is recommendation 6 around having fire safety CPD materials. We can all do CPD. I do my CPD every year, but am I competent to work on a high-rise building? No. I mean, have I understood the fire safety regulations and what needs to take place if I'm doing procurement on such a building? No, I'm not. And so we need to make sure that both CPD is mandated and there's an element of fire safety CPD materials within that. I've talked about assessment of individuals. Probably recommendation 8, you'd argue, is quite an obvious one, but across the sector, is everyone employing people who are fully competent in their role and are competent to deliver what they're supposed to deliver? Probably not, and we need to make sure that that's done. Reassessing competence on a regular basis, I've touched on. Improving those existing arrangements for assessing, accrediting individuals. So there are things in place. There are some good assessment accreditation elements in place, but are they as good as they need to be? Are they taking place as frequent as they need to be to make sure that we have people at the right level? We talked about the sectoral competence frameworks, but also, we've talked about the 12 working groups that were set up. It's not covering all elements of professions who are involved in construction. There are clearly others that weren't included, and we have referenced those in a final report, but there clearly needs to be an extension of the frameworks into some of those other critical professions that we need to focus on as well. Now, there is a duty on professional bodies, including CIPS as a procurement professional body and other professional bodies, to make sure that we have these registers of competent individuals when we assess them, making sure that there's good assessment of organisations, and we talked about the mandate that the people should have this drive to be registered and certified as such. So there's the core 16 recommendations that out of the 59 that's there in the Setting the Bar report. But I think what I should do now is come on to talk a bit more about the procurement work that I did. I was approached to chair this working group, and I was really delighted to have the opportunity to do it, but also really interesting to get the group of people we got together from all these various organisations, whether it's sort of professional bodies, contractors, interested parties, clients, if you like, through people like the LGA and Crown Commercial Services. They're really important that they all came together, and they all had different perspective, all had a different lens that they were looking at procurement through. And what was really important is we got agreement and alignment on the changes that needed to happen, because we kept on being told that there are problems in procurement. And I kept on looking at it going, well, is it a problem with the procurement people or the people who are doing procurement? And I think that's quite an interesting balance here, because the procurement processes aren't necessarily all being followed as effectively as they could be, but also there's a lot of procurement people who really don't understand how they should be doing procurement effectively. So real credit to all of these people who gave up their time, voluntary, to support the working group and to come together with some of the recommendations that we put together here. The issues that we highlighted, and this is common issues that I'm sure we've all heard across the sector, is that often these procurement activities are not carried out by people who are qualified or competent. We're all buyers. We all do it in our private life. We all know, we think, how to buy effectively. But we also know that procurement is much broader than just doing a deal. And to understand all the elements associated with working effectively with suppliers and contractors is essential. And I think the poor commercial practices due to low margins in the sector are I'm really disappointed, I suppose, is probably a polite term for it, as to one of some of the examples I've seen of how there's this drive to the bottom and poor cash flow, low margins, and therefore somewhere along the line people will cut corners and they will compromise safety, quality, because they need to make some money and to get some effective margin and cash in the way that they would want to. I'm not saying that's right, but we've seen many examples of those sort of safety being compromised for commercial gain. And so the key thing here is helping people to take that balanced approach. They're taking into account quality, safety, value for money, social value, all the aspects of things like sustainability and innovation, as well as clearly still focusing on the commercials associated with the things that they do. And we've got to flick that balance. We've got to try and change the way the procurement is done and the way that it's approached on that basis. And one of the things that we spent a lot of time doing is trying to work out who was doing this procurement. And I also always remember a working group meeting where we were in this is when we were allowed to get together. We were in an office building, we were in a meeting room, and I said to people, okay, so can you just tell me who does procurement? And we put a load of post-it notes up on a whiteboard, and there was probably, I don't know, 40 different roles associated and names of people. And we thought, well, actually, that's really challenging, because actually, how do we focus here? So one of the things that came through quite strongly in our work was to say, well, actually, there are roles defined in the CDM regulations. Clients, designer, principal contractor, contractor worker. So let's look at those roles. And let's look at the RIBA stages of construction procurement plan of work, and let's work out what level of awareness, appreciation, understanding of procurement those people need across the whole span of work. And that was quite a formative piece of work for us, because that really led us to think about the fact that actually everyone needs some understanding and awareness, appreciation of procurement. However, none of those people should really have the principal responsibility for procurement. And therefore, we came to the conclusion that we really did have to, as a core recommendation, make sure that there was a procurement lead with a comprehensive competent knowledge at all levels of, at every stage of the RIBA plan of works, whether it's up front when you're setting the design, you're selecting architects, you're putting in place consultants, all the way through to building and then handover and then in use of facilities associated. And then we've also got this other new role, the building safety manager role, that has come through from the working group 8 and is built into the draft safety bill. And that person for buildings and occupation will clearly have to have a good understanding of procurement all the way through as well. So that's the framework, and that's what we built up around it. The competence framework itself is detailed. I'm not going to go through it in this session. We will make sure that there's some links available for you so you can go and actually access it yourself, or please contact me afterwards. I'm very happy to share it with you. But it is taken from the global standard and adapted on that basis. So our key recommendations are that there must be a procurement lead in place, and they should have this comprehensive competence level based on what you would see as being a professional procurement person. They need to be assessed and accredited against the framework, and that is an essential part of the recommendations that I shared a bit earlier that all the working groups are looking at. So that you can say, I have an accredited procurement lead, they are fully competent, and they therefore can, in effect, do the right level of procurement on a high risk building. But we also recognise that this change is needed, that there needs to be a culture change as we go through. As I said, the competence framework is built on the CIPS global standard. It's a very comprehensive competence framework. We've taken the level of professional competence, or MCIPS in our terminology, that's where we'd expect people to be, and we lifted out the elements that we thought were really important for the sector, and then adapted them. I mean, I'm a procurement person, as I said at the beginning, and I have a certain lexicon, certain phrases that I use within the procurement community, but I was quite shocked that some of those words that I use, people would look at me and go, well, what do you mean by that? I've never heard the phrase, I don't know, category management before. What are you talking about? So trying to change some of those terms to make sure that anyone who picks this up and reads it understands it and understands how that can be applied in the sector was a key part of some of the changes we made. So we haven't moved a long way from the global standard, but we have contextualized it for the sector itself as we've gone through. We recognize this is not going to be easy. If it was easy, we'd have done it already. But one of the keys is making sure that people recognize their practices need to change. And I've been very encouraged. I've been very encouraged from the work that I've been involved in through the Construction Industries Council. I've more recently got involved with some discussions with the Construction Leadership Council, with Build UK and others, that everyone's saying, yes, we know we need to change how procurement is done. And there needs to be that focus on that. I'm working closely with the procurement advisory group set up under the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, looking at recommendations for improving how procurement is done. So I think there is a real acceptance. However, we then need to make sure that people start to make the changes they need to make, that they invest in the people, the education and training, and that they start to showcase what good procurement looks like in the sector and how it makes a difference, how it can really change how procurement is done, how the commercial relationships are set up, and that therefore there is a real focus and that balanced approach to decision making that we need to have in place. It's also important that this is cascaded down through to the smaller contractors. We fully recognise in construction that while you've got the prime contractors in place, there is a long tiered structure of subcontracting going on through, and you're only as good as the weakest link probably in that chain. So it's important that we get that whole procurement element also set up and shared all the way down through. And it's also recognised that on every project, can you have a dedicated procurement person? Or where do you need to have one, or where do you just need to make sure that you can actually bring in the right skills at the right time to support the program itself? But this is not easy. We need to continue to raise the bar, set the bar, share, as I'm doing this morning with others, about what we need to change to just continue to focus on this as we go forward. So where we got to, one of the things that we as CIPS committed to do was to put in place a self-assessment tool. So it's all very well having this competence framework, but helping people to assess themselves against that framework. That has taken a bit longer than I would have liked. Probably like all of you, we've had some challenges over the last 6 months in ways of working and focus and priorities. but I actually did a review on it yesterday. We're just getting the web page set up for it, so that will be ready to be launched next week. And we'll then have a self-assessment tool that will be available for people to use. We have already had that sort of piloted and rolled out and reviewed by a number of organisations to get feedback on it. And so that, I think, is a key supporter of the changes that we're trying to make. One of the things that we've also been challenged with by other people in the sector is, are you working with RICS, with RIBA, with CIOB and other institutes? And we are. We have a working group now set up just with the people who are focusing on qualifications and accreditation across those professional institutes to try and get some alignment and agreement on the changes that need to take place. Again, it's not easy, but really important that as professional institutes we do support each other, but we also do have a common approach to the need to really raise and improve procurement. I'm going to come back onto the applied learning route in a minute. One of the things I talked about was around skills training and down through the supply chain, and the supply chain school had some funding from CITB to develop some procurement skills training and to have that available for people down through the supply chain. That's been a lot of work that we in CIPS have been supporting over the last 6 months or so, but we're very close to having that available to be launched, and that will also then be available down through the supply chain itself. And we're just going to continue to raise awareness and share best practices. So my final slide for now would be just looking at this focus really. And there's a number of things that I just want to touch on here. One is this applied learning routes. One of the things that if you want to be accredited as a procurement lead focusing in this sector, one way of being accredited is getting up to MCIPS. But we also recognise that, as I said before, the language and some of the context, if you like, of construction isn't necessarily, it is different from other sectors. So we of CIPS have developed a contextualised applied learning route, which takes our core syllabus, but then puts it into the construction sector context. We've got our first programme kicking off early in the new year on that, and we'll be rolling that out as we go through 2021. And it's really important that we provide that as a route through. As I said, we've got the self-assessment tool being launched as well. And the other thing that I've been actively involved in is we have a construction senior leaders procurement group that has been running regularly and trying to raise the profile of procurement in the sector, raise the profile of the impact of good procurement can have, not necessarily just in the lens of Grenfell, but in building supply chain resilience, which was a report that we put out a couple of months ago, focusing on the fact that things need to change. And it's great that we've got this sort of group of people coming together to really help us to get the message across and drive it through as we go forward. So that's all I'm going to share for now, but I think I'll stop sharing on that basis. Very happy to pick up questions as we go through the rest of the webinar. And as I said, also very happy for any of you to contact me afterwards to just follow up either on LinkedIn or via email, just if you're interested in any of the information that's available. And I know that we will, I think we provided these slides to Corinne and so on, and I'm sure they'll get circulated to you as we go through. But I think that's it for me for now. Very happy to sort of hand back and then pass on to who's next.
Thanks, Duncan. That was great. Yeah, we'll be sharing the slides and a recording of the webinar with everyone after the event. Great. Now it's on to Sam. If you would like to share your screen with the sound tips as we discussed.
Yeah. Where are we? How's that? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Excellent. Right, morning everyone. So thanks Corinne and thanks Duncan for that excellent overview of the work that's been undertaken at the moment. My name's Sam Hart. I work at the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre. I'm an innovation manager there, but I do have a bit of experience in the work that Duncan was discussing. I spent last year following work that we'd done around quality and assurance. I spent a year at building Scottish Government Building Standards Division. looking at following the ministerial working groups that were set up post Grenfell and other building failure issues that had come about, to look at the compliance plan approach. So how is it that we've got relatively robust building regulations and generally competent contractors with in-depth quality management systems and assurance, and yet we still have issues like Grenfell and Edinburgh schools falling down and other things. So how do we look at putting those things together? Yeah, that was time that I spent looking at that last year. I'll give you a bit further information on some of the projects that came through that later on, but some information on CSIC. We're essentially there to look at innovation being change that unlocks value, and that doesn't necessarily need to be financial. That could be health and safety benefits, that could be productivity benefits, waste reduction, all sorts of different ways of looking at value itself. My specific area of expertise is around off-site construction, modern methods of construction, and being in Scotland, that's generally associated with timber. Around about 85% of Scotland's homes are built using timber in one form or another. But as you can see, just in the last year, these are the kind of figures and companies that are looking to move in and disrupt the industry. So aside from the kind of moral and other reasons for innovation, basically, if you don't look at innovating, then everyone around you will. And so you have these companies moving into house building in a way that ordinarily we wouldn't have considered. So a bit of background, sorry, on CSIC. We are essentially funded by the Scottish Government through the Scottish Funding Council, Scottish Enterprise and Highland Island Enterprise. We're one of a family of 7 innovation centres put together essentially to bring the biggest projects and the brightest minds together to solve problems and bring about innovation. We have 4 industry priorities aligned to zero carbon outcomes, and those are focused on digital transformation, accelerating industrialization, which I lead on, building sustainably, and culture change. So one of the things that Duncan spoke about was the construction culture and the relatively slow adoption of moving to newer methods. Drive culture change through procurement reform, a more collaborative approach with earlier contractor and involvement and better training. It sounds like something that would be in one of the recent reports out around the likes of Grenfell and other building failures, but it was actually from the Simon Report, 1944, 75 years ago, year before the end of the Second World War. So you can see the kind of level of issues and the amount that we need to move on, even though these sort of things were identified that long ago. You can see from the pictures that traditionally things haven't moved on particularly far or fast. And obviously, as I say, my remit in regards to modern methods of construction and off-site manufacturing is looking to move this agenda forward and try to move away from this style of construction. And then also, how do we bring about a more inclusive workforce? We've got issues around the skills agenda and an aging workforce. So how do we look about bringing in a more diverse workforce where everybody's different abilities benefits the construction sector as a whole? How do we maintain those individuals with the industry? So this is an example of the sort of projects and partners that we've put together to try to help resolve those issues. Digital transformation, construction industry from those photos hasn't historically been a big undertaker of digital. You can see from the chart here from McKinsey, the eagle-eyed amongst you will see construction virtually at the bottom there, just above growing things and killing things. So we're not exactly firing, but things are changing. Quick video just to show you the sort of thing that digital innovation can can bring about for a company. This is a video in regards to online grocery shopping through Ocado, and it's not a sales pitch. It's just a video that we use to show the kind of the levels of digitization and automation that other sectors are using.
In product development, we are powering the cutting-edge product portfolio behind our revolutionary Ocado Smart platform. Our team designs, manufactures and is responsible for the rollout of our large-scale automation products, ranging from bots to grids and everything in between. These products are the backbone of our cutting-edge, highly automated warehouses.
Managing the safety and regulatory compliance is a critical part of developing our cutting-edge products. The sheer scale of our highly automated systems, with thousands of robots operating wirelessly, presents us with some unique challenges.
As an electrical design engineer at Accreditation Technology, I'm designing state-of-the-art robotic systems and safety architecture using the latest software tools, selecting components and developing design verification test plans. Working here gives exposure to incredible products and innovation and gets more exciting as we continue to grow.
For us, reliability is of utmost importance. We test our systems to the extremes of aerospace and automotive industries. We do intensive testing right from the early design stages of the product through to the launch in order to make sure that our system and our product is delivered to our customers right first time.
We're a serial technology innovator from the product concept to the materials we use. We are continually finding new ways to break the mold in areas like battery technology, artificial intelligence, modeling and simulation.
The goal of our team is to create high quality, accurate documentation which can be used by our customers all over the world.
The data management team has a really important job. As Ocado technology is growing, our data releases and engineering change control processes are also growing. Hence, the data management team's responsibility is to ensure that the latest product information is available to everyone within the value chain. And most importantly, our processes and IT systems are as effective and user-friendly as possible.
We are incredibly proud of our culture. We've got a huge amount of autonomy, but we're also highly collaborative. We're not afraid to experiment to push the boundaries of development. We are definitely not slowing down.
So apologies for the slightly salesy nature of the video. I don't have shares in Ocado, but what it does do is it shows you the level of digitization and automation that other industries and sectors are using, and that we think we could benefit from in construction. And that moves us on to accelerating industrialization. How do we look to bring about a manufacturing mindset environment to the construction industry, and take the sort of benefits that we saw in that previous video. And change has never happened this fast before, and it will never be this slow again. Things are moving so quickly in this arena. The previous slide that had the various modular housing companies that are coming through, and the level of investment from the UK government and foreign investment into the sector is unprecedented at the moment. Based today on Industry 4.0, around that automation, digitization, data is king. How can we use that data to move the agenda forward, become more efficient, more productive, reduce waste, create a better working environment for people, and then look to move on to Industry 5.0, which is the future, which is where our collaborative robots will work with human interaction to help increase both human and robotic performance through them learning from each other. Another quick video. This is a video taken from CCG, probably Scotland's most advanced off-site manufacturer at the moment. But this will give you an idea of the level of automation in a construction off-site facility in Scotland compared to the previous video that we saw. So there you could see the difference between what's probably a semi-automated commercial factory environment where you still have plenty of operatives in there working, rolling out the insulation, nailing and screwing, doing other bits and pieces, but a certain amount of that is done automatically via robots and automation. So we're moving in the right direction, certainly, but we're some way off the automation levels that we saw in the previous video. Next up would be building sustainably, and again, I probably, as the lead for timber manufacturing, I probably should have asked Greta for a better quote, but it tells the message. Climate change and the declared climate emergency is our #1 issue, and certainly our key priority. We've heard fire engineers saying it's all very well having the most robust fire strategy out there, but if your house is sitting in 2 feet of water, it's essentially irrelevant. Everything we do at the moment needs to be around decarbonising our built environment. And regardless of your political persuasion, Scotland was the first country in the world to declare a climate emergency. And for me, therefore, we need to be the global exemplar for reducing what we use. The construction industry accounts for approximately 60% of UK material use, which is a huge amount of material use, and we generate nearly half of all UK carbon emissions, 80% of which are from buildings in use. So we have to look at how the materials we construct, and also the way we use and run our buildings. And to do that, we're looking at what we call a bio-OSM approach, biogenic offsite manufacturing. And the idea behind that is to reset and restructure the way our built environment is delivered in response to that climate emergency. And the idea is to drive and accelerate the sustainable procurement and delivery of infrastructure, new housing and developments, and community assets by adding value through the supply chain. So how that would work is you would take the piece right the way from the trees that are planted and the type of trees that are planted, right the way through to the productivity of our built environment and everything in between. And all of that creates circularity, creates jobs, creates skills, creates new materials, and all of that will be key towards us achieving our net zero carbon emissions for 2045. COP26 for me is a once in a generation opportunity. Obviously not November 2020 anymore, November 2021. I'll speak in a little bit about a project that kicks off today in the factory as a demonstrator for that. But it's an unbelievable opportunity that we have in Scotland to showcase, as I said, being that global exemplar for carbon reduction. With 4 net zero carbon focused actions within those: connected ecosystem, collaborative projects, future skills, and the innovation factory. Connected ecosystem is essentially what the likes of today is about, making sure everybody understands, is speaking to each other. To do that, we hold webinars, workshops, not so much seminars now, but digitally. We have product launches at the factory. We've got live builds going on. As I said, I'll speak about the one that's starting today. And again, we can't do them at the moment, but we were holding fairly regular hackathons with students and industry to help produce the ideas and innovation to bring about the change. We've got a huge network of innovation champions from these sorts of companies. When we produce our collaborative projects, 5 innovation champions form the assessment panel to decide whether or not we should look to fund the projects that we've put together to take forward. And we hold quarterly events with the innovation champions as well, so we can understand exactly what's going on in the industry, and likewise they can find out what's happening at the cutting edge of innovation. Collaborative projects are our core kind of day-to-day work. some examples that relate to my my side of work. The most familiar in there you might be aware of is the K brick. It's been across the telly on the One Show and the news, is a new brick created from 90% recycled construction material. So we have equipment in the factory that can mix your special sauce and in turn press it to bricks that can then be taken away for pressing and testing. And we've worked with partners on that project to commercialize, as I say, the world's first recycled brick. And the project that we're looking at starting today builds on the first commercially manufactured hardwood CLT that we produced for Design Week at the Victoria and Albert Museum. It was a project called Multiply. It was on behalf of the American Hardwood Export Council, War Thistleton Architects and Arup Engineers. Again, a very quick video just to show you. It'll demonstrate the equipment that we've got in the factory, and it'll show you the sort of thing that we're capable of producing.
Multiply is a modular timber installation made from hardwood cross-laminated timber, or CLT.
What we're doing is looking at how we can use timber instead of using concrete, instead of cement, instead of steel. These buildings that we're building, these buildings are lightweight, they are prefabricated, so they go together very quickly, very quietly, and very beautifully. A tree is in effect a carbon store. So by building our buildings in timber, we are building carbon stores. Now, if you think about the alternatives to that in concrete and cement and steel and brick, these are massive emitters of carbon. So actually, building buildings, building beautiful buildings from timber is a way not only of reducing climate change, but actually beginning to reverse the problem. So that's really exciting for us.
The fact that we are now able to bring Multiply to Milan in its entirety, but reconfigured and reshaped for the location of the Statali University courtyard, is a really important achievement. It gives us an opportunity to highlight again the amazing properties of American tulip wood. It's soft, it's lightweight, but it's incredibly strong. It has a beautiful aesthetic.
So that project was manufactured in its entirety at our innovation factory at Hamilton. There it is, looking somewhat cleaner than it does today. The UK construction industry's first dedicated digital manufacturing, prototyping and future skills centre of excellence. The project that I'd mentioned earlier that starts today, you may have seen in the press, is moving on from the Multiply project. We are commencing the UK's first homegrown mass timber home for demonstration at COP26. So that has involved bringing the supply chain partners together, the UK's largest sawmillers up in Boat of Garton, to produce homegrown timber and optimizing it to standards, to European standards required for the production of mass timber. So that's cross-laminated timber, which is what you saw being produced in the Multiply video, nail laminated timber and glulam beams. And within the factory there, we'll be manufacturing the entire home from that. We've received UK government funding through Innovate UK for this project for phase 1, and subject to successful outcomes on that, you then move through to phase 2, which will be bidding in for upwards of £3 million for scaling up that production. So another example as to how we can how can we look to decarbonize that built environment by using timber, but not just timber imported from Europe, again with higher carbon content, but actually using what has traditionally been described as, you know, lower quality or lower grade timber grown in the UK, working with the universities to evidence that actually that timber can be strength graded to be suitable for virtually all of our construction needs. And then future skills, how do we ensure, if we are looking at moving innovation forward and looking at these new techniques for construction and design, how do we ensure that the trainers who are training and upskilling people coming through to industry, how do we ensure that they understand exactly what the latest techniques are, the latest technologies they may have been teaching for 20, 30 years. Obviously, things have moved on significantly. So how do we ensure that they're fully up to date with the latest technologies? So we've put together online, originally actually this pre-COVID-19, this was supposed to be traveling around the UK on-site learning, but actually it's probably been more successful. It's certainly had a bigger reach via an online platform that we developed, and it was, I believe it was the only project that was taken forward by CITB at the outbreak of COVID, when they scaled back all of their funding, because we evidenced that it could be taken online and therefore brought to a wider audience. So some examples of work that we've done around the building, the kind of building a safer future environment. Earlier this year, we produced brand new pattern book guidance for timber frame construction and cavity barrier work. We did that in collaboration with the Structural Timber Association, the University of Edinburgh, some of the expert witnesses on that Grenfell inquiry. And obviously, through using the lights of the STA, we can reach a much wider audience for dissemination than we would if we were just working with one industry partner. They've hundreds, if not thousands, of members. As I said, 85% of Scotland's built environment is built in timber. So it's absolutely essential that this kind of work is taken forward. And obviously, the more we can increase the support for timber, despite the conflicts around the combustible ban in buildings down in England, it will obviously benefit both the Scottish industry and hopefully the kind of wider construction industry. And on the back of that, building performance and certification, you know, we've got a legal obligation via the building regulations to secure the health, safety, welfare and convenience of persons in or about buildings. As I said before, it builds trust, it builds an evidence case for ensuring that what we are building, A, meets regulations, and B, is suitable and compliant. Economic benefit around financial, job retention, job creation, waste reduction, all the things that we spoke about. And obviously by moving to a manufacturing environment, quality is drastically improved. There's the old adage of, you know, your car companies wouldn't come and build their car on your driveway. So why do we walk into muddy fields and start building houses like that? So how do we move to that manufacturing environment to increase the quality and therefore compliance of our built environment? So we are now signatories on the Building a Safer Future Charter. We will undertake all of the guidelines and steps in there in all of the work that we do. So as Duncan said, happy to take any individual questions, happy to get in touch with anybody to get in touch after this, and I know that we're looking at moving on to a Q&A, so hopefully if anyone's got any questions we can get them answered there. I'll stop sharing my screen now, hopefully. How's that? Does that work?
Yeah, I think everyone should be seeing the event page now.
Perfect.
Let me just hi, so everyone can either raise their hand via the panelists or via the attendee, and I'll unmute you and you can ask a question directly to the panelists, or you can do it through the Q&A function. I see we've got a few through the Q&A, so I'll start with those. The first is for Duncan. Referring to the bill, is it UK-wide, as Scotland has different building standards?
I'll probably claim I don't quite know. It's probably an honest answer there, Corinne. I think I've read the bill. I've read but I'm not an expert in the regulatory environment. My focus has been on procurement and the competence associated with that. So I'm referencing the bill. I think that's probably someone needs to go and have a look and read through. And I did see the question pop up, and I was thinking, well, do I go and have a quick look now? But I've been making it up. I think it's one of those things that there is some good recommendations in the bill. And I would hope, as we would all hope, that the various governments and regulatory environments come together where there's good recommendations to go forward. But I can't specifically answer that question.
Okay, thanks. And this one's for Sam. It's kind of a comment as well. The problem with digitisation and automation in non-standard construction for schools, hospitals, etc., is that it can remove some of the design innovation options, make everything look a bit the same. Is there scope to change that, or what? How would you?
Yeah, it's a common comment, and one that I think is certainly valid. Obviously, the design teams are working at the moment on trying to move that agenda forward. I think the idea, if we can move and we can get to a position where we're looking at a platform designed for manufactured assembly and disassembly, incidentally, and look to have a standardized or customizable kit of parts. If there is enough kit of parts, or enough parts within that kit, if you like, you have the potential end up with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different combinations of putting those together. Now, I think probably the issue at the moment is that we don't have as many parts in that kit as we would like. So yes, there is an element of repetition, and certainly if you look at some of the companies on the slides that I showed there in the modular housing examples, there you can tell there is an element of standardization in those house types, and they are generally at the moment delivering for RSLs and housing associations. Not that for me that there should be any less aesthetic in that, but I think at the moment that's what's driving it. But over time, hopefully, as designers, we have more designers coming into this space, and technology moves forward, and the learning and the understanding moves forward, then that kit of parts will increase, and then the options around the design aesthetic will increase. But absolutely, at the moment, they're with a smaller kit become a more limited number of options.
Mm-hmm.
If I can maybe just come in there as well, Sam, I think one of the discussions we've been having as a construction procurement group as well has been absolutely in that space. And when you do look at comparing the construction sector with other sectors, and I know you showed the Ocado video there, but even automotive, I mean, they'll share a platform. They'll share a platform for a car between 4 different brands. All those 4 cars will look different. But the fundamental platform they're built on is the same, because they've done exactly the same reason, which is for consistency, quality, safety, all those aspects associated with it. And I worked for Black & Decker for 10 years, and we did exactly the same on our products. We had a whole variety of different looking products that looked like in the market, but the core that we built around was a standard core, because we knew we had the right performance and quality there. So I think there's a lot that can be lifted and taken from other sectors that can be used without thinking that everything is going to look the same. So I think there's a lot of sectors who have proved that standardization would work. And if we can get away from everything being bespoke, I think that will have a huge benefit for everything, including safety and quality, and some of the other aspects of sustainability you've already touched on.
Yeah, no, absolutely, completely agree. And as we've commented, construction has historically been relatively slow on the uptake of these things. So whereas that agenda may have moved forward very quickly, in automation in the automobile sector in regards to, chassis is the same, but, kit parts is different. Construction is, relatively speaking, only just moving into that arena, and therefore it's all quite new. So we'll take a bit of time to bed in.
That actually leads quite well on to, we've had another comment. It's forgive me, there's a lot of text. I might catch over my words. The Latham and Egan reports published over 20 years ago covered many of the recommendations that you spoke about, Sam, but still the culture in construction remains adversarial. I can't speak today. With separated design and construction in all but projects with available budget and clients willing to commit expenditure to change. They've worked in the industry for 30 years, and until there's a cost saving to the client or they're forced to change, they think it will persist. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that was very apparent in the work we did across the Scottish Government Building Standards Division, and I'll let Duncan talk more on the procurement side of things. But one of my days per week was spent with the construction procurement team, and they were working very hard on trying to come up with options around how do we procure not just on best value, but how do you look at the other measures, and if you look at the other measures, how do you prevent the issues that the associated issues that would come with that? So how do you find a happy medium between all of these things? And it's an incredibly difficult, hence the reports from 20-30 years ago still sounding true now. But from my perspective, the two things from my perspective is work is very much being done at the moment to try to look and resolve those. And from a Scottish Government perspective around innovation, that's it's exactly why we were set up. We weren't here 5 or 6 years ago, and the need to move these sorts of agendas forward has been identified. Significant funding has been put in place, and as I say, so slowly, I'd like to think we're moving the agenda forward. But around and I suppose more specifically around public procurement, I think that issue persists. Duncan, would you say?
I would, Sam. I think it's a comment that has been made and has been made in many forums and discussions I've been involved in over the last couple of years now. And we can sit back and go, well, nothing's going to change, or we can do it on the basis of things will change. And I think your comment there about government initiatives that's behind it. One of the challenges at the moment, there is a lot of initiatives all about trying to make change. There's Procurement for Value, there's the Construction Leadership Council looking at different work streams they've kicked off, there's elements of the work that I've been involved in, there's this committee that's going to go in place to drive competence forward. It's all around getting procurement done better within the sector. And I just think my sense, having looked at this and been involved in it, is there is some momentum here, and there is a real desire that things will change. Of course, it will take time. We need the early adopters. We need organisations to get on board. We need government to take a lead to sort of showcase this all the way through. And we also need this sort of decision-making processes to be improved so that you don't just go for the lowest quote. And that's back to fundamental about procurement. That is not good procurement. There's nowhere in the regulations to say go for the lowest quote, and yet people still go for the lowest quote. So we just have to just continue to bang the drum, focus on it, showcase where things are done really well and where we've made some great improvements, but also where things have gone wrong, we need to highlight them and we need to learn from them. I think all the organisations involved just need to continue to push this agenda forward and to focus on it. Any of you been involved in a culture change? No, it takes time. And that's within a company. Trying to change a culture across a sector will take time. But I do believe with the focus that's on this and the fact that there is still a Grenfell inquiry going on, there will be findings coming from it. There is government focus. I do think things will change, but do recognise it takes time, and it needs people like on this forum and others to take that message and to see what they can do in their own organisations to start to push some of these initiatives forward.
Great. Got a question for you, Duncan. Is in relation to the rapid changes in technology covered by Sam's presentation. How would the construction industry training for MCIPS take them into account?
That's a good question. I think if you look at procurement, and one of the things that I would say of anyone in procurement who is at the sort of professional qualified level, you need to look at, I would expect people to be looking constantly at their supplier base, looking at whether they are getting the innovation and the developments they need and bringing those back into their organisation. So, and I'll go back to my background, when I was working in those roles, yeah, you should be looking at the latest innovations and developments, and you should go, well, why aren't we doing this in our own organisation? So it's not just a training aspect; it's a commercial inquisitiveness, if you like, to always look at something that's out there and then say, well, why aren't we using that effectively within our own organisation? So you can train people to get there, but it's also a behavioural aspect of people saying we will push this forward. And I saw Sam's presentation just now, but I've seen some others in our construction group, and I've been delighted to see just how excited people get from looking at these things that can be done and thinking, well, we've got to do something here. We've got to change something in our own environment here. So if you get people to understand the need for innovation, for sustainability, for sourcing things more locally, for understanding their supply chains, some of these things will come naturally from that sort of inquisitiveness and putting in place good, strong strategies for their sourcing in the future.
I think as well, just to add, Corin, that we, from an innovation perspective, it's very clear set out in funding, whether that's our funding or the likes of funding through UK or other people, is that we take these innovations and we develop them and we prototype them and we pilot them, but we can only take them to the point of commercialization. So once we've evidenced that that it's feasible and they work, it's then down to the industry partner to get certification, verification, and take them to the point where, I don't know, BBA certification, whatever it might be, where it then becomes available or more available to be utilized within a procurement framework. Whereas obviously very difficult to just say, oh, well, we've got this new technology, we haven't verified it, no, we haven't certified, there's a very clear route from taking an idea through to commercialization, and once we've evidenced that it's feasible, it's then usually down to the enterprise agencies like Scottish Enterprise or Highland Island Enterprise to move the support from CSIC across to the commercialization teams with them.
I've got a question about offsite construction. It's about how do you address the interface between offsite modules/sections with an existing and possibly flawed building, about merging them?
With existing buildings and new buildings, it's a challenge, and one to be honest with you, I don't have an enormous amount of experience of myself. I know there are companies out there, and I know I'm working with, for example, at the company on the slides at the start, Ilka Homes down in England, have an offering whereby they can bring an extension, if you like, pre-built, and drop it in place. Similarly, I know that there are loft conversion companies who will come and lift your roof off and drop a ready-made loft conversion with a new roof on it and just cut a hatch and drop your staircases in. So it is possible. I know from an engineering perspective, it's a challenge, and it's one that's difficult to achieve when you have different designs, different products meeting each other. But it's one that there are companies out there that are doing it. It's as I say, it's not. I don't have any personal experience in that world, because what we're developing tend to be kind of standalone products or processes at the moment. But I would relish the opportunity to create a project that looked at how the interface of new and old came together. And out of interest, there is a CivTech 5.0 challenge out at the moment about repurposing buildings hit through COVID-19, office, shops, other things, and how do we move to repurpose them through potentially modular construction and use them in a kind of COVID-friendly manner. So there is work ongoing out there around that agenda.
Great, thanks. The tragedy at Grenfell largely occurred due to poor design, installation and management of retrofit and repair of an existing building. How can procurement and innovation support the ongoing maintenance and management of our millions of existing buildings when owners have very little interest or understanding of the complexities and costs of maintaining and updating the safety of their properties?
That's a really good question, and I think it's one that I'm very conscious. Whenever we've been looking at construction, it's very easy to get stuck into the new build and the focus on what you can do differently when you're building it new. But I mean, the question is absolutely right. This is about retrofit and refurbishment. And as part of the competence work that's been going on, there's been a lot of discussion around that. What was interesting, and the critical role that's coming through from the recommendations, is this building safety manager. That actually having a building safety manager who is focused on the safety of the residents that are in the building, but also has to be actively involved in any discussions and debates about what goes on to that building and what changes in that building, is a key role. And that's part of where the regulations come into place, because that then allows us to have a real focus on the so I'm just looking at the question that popped up. Sorry,
that's
I was wondering who else it was. So I was just, it's the joy of doing webinars. I think the focus on, even if you're doing a retrofit or a refurbishment, you've still got to go through the same process. You've got to make the same decisions. You've got to take a balanced approach. Yes, there's clients who just want it done cheaply, and they'll continue. Part of the regulation change is to hold them to account, and part of the pushback has to be, well, that's not the right thing to do things, and the regulations and the environment around it have to support that. I come back to culture. It is a cultural change. Why have we still got buildings with cladding on the outside that hasn't been replaced? It's because some clients just don't want to spend the money on it. And while government's trying to help, it still hasn't solved all the problems. So yes, there will be that legacy of it, and we need to be very aware of that. But there's others who do get it and do grasp it and do want to make the improvements through various housing associations and others as they go forward. So I think we just got to keep working with the clients as well.
Yeah, great. Another comment, so public procurement also has issues with legislation restricting what can be done and ongoing collaboration, as it doesn't provide competition. Having come from an architectural background themselves into procurement, they can often find the regulations make the process a little bit frustrating. What would be your experience of that, kind of bridging those gaps?
Maybe if I come in on that, I don't want to be scathing of public procurement people, because they do a great job. But there are times when they get stuck by following the process, and they don't actually look at how the process can be applied effectively. I do get the fact that there needs to be transparency and visibility, but there are ways in which you can do collaboration. There are ways in which you can engage with contractors and suppliers and designers and so on, and still be compliant. And I know whenever I've spoken to anyone in government and central government, particularly in I'll probably England rather than the UK, this commercial mindset that people need to bring to thinking about what's the best way of doing it, but still being compliant. And that collaboration is a message that's comes through strongly. I know it's come through from the discussions of how things can be improved. I don't think the regulations stop you doing it. It's just that people are fearful of doing it and then being sort of challenged. But it is the right thing to do. So will there need to be some regulatory changes around procurement rules? Probably. If Brexit ever happens, will we get out the other side and have some slightly different EU procurement or different regulations? I'm sure there's lots of consultation already going on in that space, and I know the CLC has been actively involved in that. So I think we will see some changes, but I'd say that you can still collaborate and still follow the regulations and the processes involved. You just got to look at the best way of doing it, but still doing it in a transparent way that therefore isn't open to challenge.
This is kind of a question for both of you. Where things have gone wrong, in their opinion, is in the commercially motivated interest by various collaborative parties, i.e. academia taking over the innovative process at the expense of an innovative SME. What would be your opinion on this?
Sorry, Colin, I just missed the end of that there. Sorry, could you just repeat it?
Yeah, sorry. Where things have gone wrong in commercially motivated interest, kind of by various collaborative parties, i.e. academia taking over an innovative process at the expense of an innovative SME. So
Did you say academia taking over from an SME?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, we you know, if you just take our examples, we put projects together on the basis that the industry partner is unable to solve or answer the challenge without an academic partner. Because we are funded by the Scottish Funding Council, our funding within the project can only go towards the academic input. But that academic input is there because, as I say, because we've been approached by the industry partner to say, you know, we need some help with this. In my experience, I haven't found academics taking over from SMEs, and in fact, I think the academics that I know that work on it wouldn't want to. They obviously want to collaborate, but they're not in a position to be able to take over from the SME. So from an industry perspective, I think the opportunities are there for the SMEs, and also if you think our projects, and again, whether it's UKRI, Innovate UK, generally you need to have an SME or a micro business in those applications for it to meet the scope. So yeah, I suppose for me, I haven't experienced that personally, but we do work, as I said, we work very closely with industry and academia, but that's because one needs the other, if you know what I mean, yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Would the panel agree that there are no consequences for poor compliance, and this is a core issue for the lack of change?
Yes. I think, yeah, and the reason I'm so, you know, this has come up through many discussions on this is to, so what, you know, you've got these great recommendations for improvement, so what? You know, and I think that came up in the previous question about, you know, if a client just wants to carry on doing things on the cheap, can they? There are regulations in place. There are building safety controls in place. There are, you know, there are inspectors around. There are things that should be happening. And are they enforced in the way that they should be? Probably not, which is why I think some of the changes that's coming through are essential to bring some consequences and to bring some elements associated with that. There was a lot of discussion through the Competence Steering Group about mandate, you know, and forcing people to do it. And you'd say that the NHCLG in putting the bill together did reinforce some of those mandates, but there's a lot that we felt we would have liked to have also been included. And they were going, well, that maybe that's secondary legislation or legislation later. So there is this sense of we do need to have more consequences and hold people to account as it goes forward. Yes, I agree. I mean, without that, will you get all the changes needed that we're looking for? Probably not.
Yeah, I would completely agree with Duncan. Through the work again at Scottish Government Building Standards Division last year, you know, we not uncovered, but I suppose it was new information to me that you know, the levels of fines, for example, are deterrents to prevent contractors. If you take, for example, commencing work without a building warrant, which is, you know, fundamentally not something you should be doing. You know, that I think off the top of my head, the maximum fine is £5,000. Well, from a contractor's perspective, if they don't go on site when they say they're going to go on site, the impact might be hundreds of thousands of pounds to them. So that when they're weighing up the risk, well, absolutely, it's a no-brainer. I'll take the £5,000 fine, and because I need to start, and it doesn't bear thinking about if I don't. So we need to find a balance in there somewhere that restricts and prevents certain things from happening on the back of the fact that it would cost too much not to. Yeah, I do agree. Yes.
Great. We've got a couple more minutes if anyone wants to submit any more questions through the Q&A or raise their hand. I don't see any raised hands, so everyone's feeling a bit shy today, and I don't think we've got any more questions. Well, that just leaves me to say thank you everyone who attended. We'll be sending out the recording, the slides, and everything discussed within them as a follow-up, and thank you to the panelists, and have a lovely day, everyone. That's kind of goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Corinne. Thank you.